Hello and welcome to the next Alumni Career Webinar, Be the Leader Others Will Follow, with Debra Doroni from the class of 1989. I'm Mauras Story, Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, offered exclusively for Holy Cross graduates. We'll be together for an hour. After the formal presentation, Deb will take questions from you for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the question function located on your webinar control panel. While you're there, take note of two additional features. First is the chat function. Deb will encourage you to share thoughts using the chat box throughout the webinar. The second is the handouts function. Deb has included a handout for you to download that can help you make the most of this session and set up a plan to implement meaningful change moving forward. This presentation is recorded and will be made available to all participants in a few days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Deb. Debra Doroni, as I said, from the class of 1989, is a certified and International Coach Federation accredited executive and leadership coach whose mission is to engage leaders at all levels to fulfill their greatness in their professional and personal lives. She brings more than 25 years experience as an executive, having held strategic and operational leadership roles in large and small physician practice, academic hospital, and for-profit healthcare settings. She holds a BA in biology from the College of the Holy Cross and an MBA in finance from Boston College. She completed her coach training at the Gestalt International Study Center and is currently pursuing a PsyD in leadership psychology from William James College. Congratulations, and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to turn things over to Deb.
Thank you so much, Maura. And I'm going to share my webcam here with all of you, just so you can get a little bit of a sense of the person behind the presentation. I'm delighted that you're taking the time out of your busy schedule to, make time for yourself in developing your leadership. So congratulations, that's a huge step. I thought I would start by telling you a little bit more about my story. So as Maura said, I was a healthcare executive for more than 25 years. I spent the bulk of my career, almost 20 years, at Mass General Hospital in Boston, where I ran the Department of Surgery and the Transplant Center. By all accounts, I had a great ride, a wonderful job working with uber smart people, really making stuff happen that felt important and felt like I was making a difference for other people. But I kept feeling like I was hitting a glass ceiling. And I don't mean the glass ceiling of gender. I'm very happy to say that that was not an issue at the organizations I worked with, but more that my leadership was hitting a plateau. I really wanted to be at the senior most tables, in the C-suite, charting strategy for the organization, and I couldn't quite get myself there. No matter how much more responsibility and authority I got, I just couldn't get beyond a certain level. And I watched my colleagues progress, or at least some of them, who either got promotions in the organization or went outside of the organization and came back to bigger roles. And so I tried that. I actually took a job in another organization that was more strategic in nature. But pretty quickly, I find myself back into that problem solving, juggling 100 balls that are thrown in my direction, and not really advancing or seeing an opportunity to advance in the way that I had hoped. And so this is a great chance to start using the chat function. I'm curious, how many of you find yourself in that situation where you feel like you're working harder, you're doing a lot of great work, but just can't seem to get above a certain level in the organization? So I was incredibly fortunate in that my organization provided coaches for all of its leaders. And what I realized in working with my coach was that here I was thinking I wanted to chart strategy for the organization, and I wasn't even being strategic about my own career. or about developing myself as a leader. I really wasn't in the driver's seat of my own leadership development. I relied very heavily on my bosses to guide me and to define my leadership. And both of them had been in the organization for, 30 plus years. And so I was focusing on getting stuff done, taking on everything that was asked of me, thinking that if I showed that I was a team player and stepped up when things needed to be done, that was what was going to help me rise in the organization. But I hadn't really evaluated what I needed to do, and I didn't pay attention to what was needed to take my leadership to the next level. And most importantly, I didn't consciously think about the impact I wanted to have as a leader and on other people. And so as I worked with my coach, I became a lot more deliberate about who I wanted to be as a person and as a leader, how I wanted to show up, what it took for me to be at my best in order to show up in that way. And really the difference that I wanted to make, that I wanted my leadership to make in the world. And for me, these lessons were profound. And I realized, that I didn't want to chart strategy for an organization. I wanted to help leaders chart strategy for their leadership. And now I have the privilege of doing what I love every day, which is helping people be the best version of themselves. So I'm here today to help you learn the lessons I learned in working with my coach, about what it really takes to get to that next level, to really be a leader, not just a manager, and to show up as the kind of leader that others will just naturally want to follow. To really help you claim your passion and purpose as a leader, and to master your actions so that you can position yourself for bigger roles and still have a life outside of work. And I'll show you there are essentially 5 steps to this, to really getting clear on what you want, mastering your leadership presence. And by the way, in case there are early careerists on the line today, leadership is not a job title. Anyone can lead from anywhere in an organization. Leadership is a behavior. It's about how you conduct yourself. And so these 5 steps are aimed at allowing anyone to create the best version of themselves, to really get in that zone and to show up in a way that will make you inspiring and influential as a leader, and someone who people naturally want to follow. So the first thing we'll look at is how to recognize where you want to make changes. Next, I'll give you some techniques to help you envision a picture of where you want to take your leadership and create the roadmap for getting there. We'll talk about how to leverage your strengths and the support of and ideas of other people to help you stay on course in following that map. And then I'll give you some very practical advice about how to make time in your life to get to that leadership destination. And we'll leave time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So the first step is really letting yourself dream of ideally what you want your leadership destination to be. So this can be one of the absolute hardest things to do because it requires you to carve out some time to really focus on yourself. And that can be challenging for those of us who are drawn by the Holy Cross Jesuit ideals of being men and women who serve others. And it can be hard for those of us who are used to running on all cylinders to really take the time to be reflective and not be kind of in action mode. And it's really important in this that you take the time to assess in writing what you want from your career and your personal life. So ask yourself, what kind of role do you want to have? In what kind of an organization? What skills do you want to be using? How do you want to show up as a leader? What's the difference you want your leadership to be making? And what does it take for you to be the best version of yourself? What will it get you if you made those changes? And how will it feel? And that can be really hard to let yourself dream in that way. So, so pay attention to where you might be saying, well, if only I could this, or yeah, but, or, that little voice in your head saying you can't or you don't. Just put that aside. Put aside your concerns about what other people might think. Just put it in check for now. Pretend that you have a magic wand and just let yourself imagine what it would feel like to be in that position, and write it all down to make it visible. And so I need to confess up front that I'm a wannabe scientist. I went to Holy Cross as a biology major with the intent of becoming a research scientist. And one of the things that really drew me to becoming a coach is that it's all grounded in science, including neuroscience. And actually, I'm majoring in the neuroscience of leadership as part of my doctoral program. So you're going to hear this theme from me. So that process of letting yourself think about big possibilities and tapping into the emotions that are associated with that and writing them down actually activates different parts of your brain, different chemicals in your brain, that creates new circuits, allows new ideas to come forward, and it shifts your motivation and energy and your presence, basically your executive presence, how you show up as a leader. And I can't emphasize enough how powerful that is. It's amazing when you feel it happen to yourself. So just let yourself have that dreaming time. So next step, know your superpowers. One of the most important things you can do as a leader, and really in life in general, is to get really clear on your values and your strengths. And your values are who you are at your core. They're often unknown or unnamed rules that you use to identify what's important to you and to conduct yourself. Your strengths are the elements of your character that make you you. And when you're using your strengths, you are being the best version and most fulfilled version of yourself. And I can't remember if Maura said we're going to make these slides available at the end of the presentation. And at the end of the slide deck, there are a couple of assessments that allow you to get in touch with your values, to identify your character strengths. They're both free. There's some nice resources on the websites associated with them, and they don't take very long, maybe 15 or 20 minutes to fill out. So take advantage of those tools, and when you get the values in front of you, use them as sort of a guidepost or a lens for when you need to make decisions and when you need to make trade-offs and how you focus your time and energy. Ask yourself, when you have those strengths in front of you, where are you leading yourself and others from a place of your values, using your strengths? Where could you be using your strengths more? So much of us spend a lot of time trying to get better at things we're not good at, and it's going to be tempting when you see that list of strengths to go to the bottom and say, oh, I need to get better at this. But try to resist that temptation, because when you're working from your strengths, that's when you get in your zone. And I'm not saying it's not important to try to improve, but you will get a lot more leverage out of, maximizing your strengths. Think about making changes or saying no to things that don't fit your values or don't let you use your strengths. And just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's what brings you satisfaction. Often we get more of what we're good at imposed on us by other people, and our time and energy can easily get consumed. You know, when I was working with my coach and I got really clear on my strengths and my values, what it takes for me to be at my best, and connected with the difference that I wanted my leadership to make in the world, I realized that my greatest professional contributions and fulfillment were coming from the people development aspect of my job, which for most of my career was maybe only 10% of what I was focusing on. So 90% of the time, my energy was going to things that maybe I enjoyed, but they weren't the things that really put the wind in my sails. You know, that was working with people. And developing teams and you know, helping improve communication. And so I realized that that's what I really wanted to do. And so I spent time researching professions that would allow me to do that, and would allow me to create a work-life dynamic that allowed me to be at my best. And so, you know, throughout my career, I was working, you know, between 10 and 14-hour days. And for the last 7 years of my career, I was commuting 5 hours a day. That was not allowing me to be at my best. And so in my case, I opted for a pretty big shift in my profession. But that's not necessary. Not everyone has to make drastic changes. You just need to get really clear on what you want for yourself, for your career, and for your leadership. Figure out what's getting in the way of that and clear away those obstacles so you can be in that zone where you're at your best. You'll be a better, more inspiring, more influential leader when you're leading from your strengths and your values and at your best. People will naturally follow you. So step 3 is, I think, the hardest one. So this is focusing less on knowing and more on learning. And why it's hard is because so many of us are kind of programmed to think we have to show up as experts, and especially when we're in a leadership position. We have to look smart, we have to have all the answers, and it leads us to tend to give a lot of opinions, directives, and advice, and prescribe courses of action. And there are certainly times when that's absolutely exactly what's needed. But sometimes it can also be very demoralizing and demotivating and kind of stunting for the people who you lead. And that's particularly true when you're at a point where you're leading other leaders. And I think it's also at a point when you're developing young talent, you know, people who are early in their careers, because you're kind of handing them fish instead of teaching them how to fish. And while that may be easy, it may be expedient for you and well, for you, they learn less by having you do that. And so it ultimately is less effective for them in the long term. So there's another way of being smart, right? So we all know about intelligence or IQ. There's something else called emotional intelligence or EQ, which is a different way of being smart from having all the answers and kind of knowing stuff. EQ has to do with how you manage yourself and how you manage your interactions and your relationships with others. And having a high emotional intelligence is correlated with high performance, and that there's tons of research around that. It's not restricted to certain positions, no matter what level, what industry, and it's particularly important if you are a leader and for outstanding leadership. And I should note, it's not even restricted to organizations. You will be more effective in teams, in families, in pairs, if you have a higher emotional intelligence. And the great news is that emotional intelligence can be increased through practice, just like, you know, learning how to play the piano, or becoming a better tennis player, or becoming more physically fit. The more you deliberately practice being more emotional intelligent, the more you gain. And so what does that mean exactly? So Emotional intelligence has to do with our self-awareness, which is, how in tune we are to ourselves and our impact on other people. It has to do with our self-management, how we consciously choose our actions and our behaviors. And it also has to do with how in tune we are to other people and how we consciously manage our interactions with them. And so steps 1 and 2 that we already discussed will help you increase your self-awareness, right? Knowing your strengths, knowing your values, know what you want is about getting to know yourself better. The self-management part of emotional intelligence has to do with being really deliberate about how you show up in the world, your tone, your body language, the words that you choose, the emotion that you display or that you don't display. Being really deliberate and conscious about the impact you want to have on others. The increasing your awareness of others part of EQ is what really requires us to set aside that expert self and focus more on learning about others and really listening, not just waiting your chance to talk. And the way you do that is by practicing active listening. So first of all, pay attention. Don't multitask. Put down the phone. Better yet, turn it off when you're engaging with other people. Ask questions. Ask lots of what and how questions that are aimed at understanding where the other person is coming from. Find out what's important to them, what worries them, what allows them to be at their best, what they most enjoy doing. When you're trying to problem solve or someone comes to you with a problem, give them the opportunity first to share their ideas and opinions and be heard. What have they already tried? What haven't they tried? This way of really understanding what kind of help someone needs or wants before providing opinions and solutions is critically, critically important. It's what helps people gain competency. And again, it's really hard because in order to do that, you have to say, let me set aside having the answers or think I have the answers, and let me find out, first of all, what the issue really is. Again, pay attention to that person's tone, body language, the words they use, and the emotion that they're showing or not showing. And on that note, be really deliberate about making sure everyone gets heard and can express their opinions and their emotions. And you do that by creating kind of the rules of engagement for your team, and figuring out ways among the team that you hold yourself accountable for one another, abiding by those rules. And there's a couple reasons why all this is important from a neuroscience perspective. So first, trying to understand in a non-judgmental way where other people are coming from and having those explicit ground rules and holding one another accountable for abiding by them creates trust and a sense of kind of safety with others. That activates the feel-good parts of our brain. Whereas if you're being challenged or you don't feel like you can speak up or you're being told what to do, that activates the fight, flight, or freeze parts of our brain that go back to our days as cavemen, and we feel that protective instinct kicking in. Solving problems and coming to our own conclusions releases those feel-good chemicals. It increases learning, and it really increases a sense of accomplishment over being told what to do. And the hard part is that we're trying to increase those feel-good chemicals for other people, but in order to set aside our own expert, we have to be willing to let go of how good it makes us feel to be an expert. But I can't tell you how important this is, because practicing that way of showing up as a leader, as open, curious, supportive, versus directive and having all the answers, is one of the most challenging skills to develop. And I can attest to this as a coach, because that's what coaches do. They help you come to your own conclusions. And I had a lot of years of thinking I had to be directive. And so I struggle every day with putting away that expert persona. But it's also one of the most impactful skills to be effective and influential and inspiring other people as a leader. And I think one of the best quotes I've ever seen on this is from Maya Angelou, about how people won't remember exactly what you said or what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And as a leader, if you make them feel good and you think about what's going to make this person feel good, that's going to make all of the difference. So another really critical step in developing your self-awareness and in being deliberate about crafting your strategy for your leadership and your career is to make sure that you actively seek input from many mentors and advisors. And while that can include, your boss, your spouse, your friends, or other family members, it's really important not to rely solely on them for all of your guidance. And, the reason for that is that they all likely have some pretty strong opinions about what you should and shouldn't do. And most likely they have some kind of skin in your game, right? So the actions you take, the decisions you make impact them directly in some way. So instead, think about creating your own personal advisory board so that you can gain from a variety of perspectives. So include your boss, your spouse, your friends, your family, but think about finding other people who aren't so directly connected or affected by your outcomes. And I have to tell you, this is a major mistake that I didn't do. As I mentioned, I relied solely on my bosses, who were wonderful, incredibly successful and bright people, but they had their own experiences and they weren't me. They weren't coming from the same place I was. They didn't have the same aspirations I did. And this idea of having an advisory board isn't just for early careerists, for people just starting out. We all need to get a variety of perspectives throughout our careers in order to be effective leaders. And don't just focus, cultivating your advisory board when you're looking for a new job. And maybe not even just for your professional life. Tap into your advisors, to be the best version of yourself, make the best decisions for you, really, and for support for both your life and throughout your career. And so how do you start to do that? Well, start with that list of everyone you know. What's their relationship to you? And think about, where do they work? What do they do? What unique skill or perspective do they have? Who do they know? Who do you want to get to know that they know? Who do you admire most that you'd like to get to know? Why do you admire them? How could these people on this list be helpful in advising you about your leadership goal? And remember that these people don't need to be more senior than you. They don't need to be from within your organization or even from within your industry. Seek out colleagues, subordinates, people you trust in other industries to get perspectives and feedback. Professional organizations are a really great way to find mentors and advisors who can provide perspective, in a safe space where there could be confidentiality and/or they're not affected by your outcome. But when you go to the professional organizations or community organizations, you can't just show up. You have to participate, you have to connect, you have to get to know people. And there's a strong temptation to show up as that expert and try to impress people. But try to resist that, again, and instead focus on getting to know them. And then reach out. Ask to meet for coffee or for lunch or for a virtual coffee or lunch. And, some people feel like they're burdening other people if they reach out to ask for help. But mentorship is a two-way street. people who provide advice and mentorship and guidance get just as much out of that as the person receiving it. And I can tell you this from personal experience. That's what blows my hair back. I love doing that so much that I made a whole career out of it. So know that you're making other people feel good, and there's that neuroscience, those brain chemicals again. When you're asking for their advice, people love to talk about themselves and their opinions. Give them that chance. Be deliberate and strategic about who you select as your advisors and how you use their time and your time. Get clear on what you want, what your goal is from that relationship. What perspective and contribution can that person uniquely provide that will help you towards your goals? Be super specific. Don't expect them to do the work for you. Make it easy as possible for them to help you. So the best analogy I have for this is to think about base hits rather than grand slam home runs. Maybe your ultimate goal is to get a new job or to get a promotion. And if you walk in to meet with somebody and say, I want a new job, who do you know who can help me, or do you have something for me? And they don't, they're going to feel a little bad that they weren't able to help you. So think about what are the base hits towards getting that new job. What information can they provide you? And make sure you walk away with some homework, either for them, or I should say, and for yourself, not either, both. Who can they introduce you to? What can they tell you about new skills you need to acquire, and where can you go to learn those? What ideas do they have about how you can get closer to that job, so that they can really feel like they've helped you and you walk away getting some major new learning, and you get a base hit out of that. And remember that this relationship is a two-way street. So ask them how you might be of assistance to them in the future. Follow up with a thank you note. And touch base periodically when you don't have an ask for them, to give them updates. Let them know how their advice is panning out for you. Send them an article or a quote or something that lets them know you were thinking about them or that might be helpful to them. And you have to be ready and willing to accept and act on feedback and take risks, because otherwise, you're wasting your time and their time by getting great advice and perspective if you're not willing to hear it and do something with it. However, remember that most people are going to give you advice based on their own experiences and what has happened in their career. And while that's valuable for you, only you know what's right for you. So don't be afraid to take that advice, look at it from your own perspective and situation with a critical eye. You don't feel like you have to blindly follow whatever advice is given. So how do you take all this and put it into action? And I believe it's by getting really clear on your big rocks. And in case you've not heard this analogy before, I think of in maybe elementary or middle school science, when the teacher took an empty jar and they put a bunch of big stones in it so it was filled to the top, and they said, is it full? And we all said yes. And then they took some pebbles and it filled in around the big rocks and it was filled to the top. But then they added sand, and then they added water until it was literally overflowing, right? You have to get really clear on what your big rocks are, the biggest priorities in your life, your most important goals, the projects and opportunities that are going to be most impactful for you as a leader, and get those in your jar before your jar gets filled up with your or other people's pebbles and sand and water. That's critically important. Once you're clear on your big rocks, ask yourself, what steps do you need to take to advance towards those goals? How will you get yourself to take the necessary steps? What help or advice or resources might you need? And what obstacles might get in your way? And remember to write all this down, that neuroscience piece. I'm guessing that for most of you, the biggest obstacles are time and energy. So I'm going to give you some really practical tips about how to maximize your time and energy. So the first thing is to get organized, and I'm often surprised at how many executives don't even do these very basic ABCs of organization. One, which is to record everything in some kind of a collection tool, a journal, a notepad, a paper calendar, or an app. And again, at the end, there's some resources at the end of the slide deck, which you'll get after the presentation, with some recommendations for apps and other tools. Train yourself to capture everything you need to remember in that tool and every commitment you make to other people. It frees up your brain's energy and capacity if you do that. Schedule everything in some kind of a calendar, whether it's paper or an app. You know, make sure you schedule time to work on those big rocks and at a time of day when you're going to be at your best. You know, don't just let your schedule get filled up with what everyone else wants you to do. Set aside time every day and every week to kind of review your correct collection tool, create your to-do list, and get everything scheduled. Write out your values and your big rocks and put them somewhere where you see them often, you know, on a sticky note on your computer, your dashboard, your bathroom mirror. I showed you an example of a word cloud that included my strengths and my values and my mission, my why. Use something like that. Hang it up where you can see it. Vision boards are also helpful. And I know that some of this may sound a little bit woo-woo for some folks, but keeping your values and your strengths and your goals visible so that they get your attention will keep them top of mind when you're trying to prioritize and make decisions. And again, here comes that neuroscience. Making the why of your goals visible taps into feelings and emotions, and that increases your motivation and your energy around achieving those goals. So those are kind of the basics. You know, a very important place, a piece of practice to kind of take it to the next level that we definitely don't think of often as leaders, and particularly if we fall into the servant leader category, is practicing self-care. It's critical as a leader that you put on your own oxygen mask before you help others put theirs on. You cannot be a resource for other people and lead them and inspire them if you're feeling deplenished. So, you know, the basics: get enough sleep, eat well, exercise. You know, that's really motherhood and apple pie. To kind of take it to the next level, think about building mental, physical, and emotional renewal into your workday every day, not just before and after, but even if it's just a few minutes, to do whatever it is that helps you reboot your brain, whether that's, you know, formal meditation or breathing techniques, or it's a 5-minute nap, or taking a walk, or watching a funny video. You know, have a chat with a colleague about something that excites you both, and be careful that that's not a venting session. You know, the idea here is to reboot yourself, not to be drained of your energy. I find it really interesting that we spend a ton of time focusing on taking care of other parts of our body, right? Our heart, our muscles, our joints, our gut, but we really don't deliberately focus on taking care of our brain. And sleep and mental and emotional renewal are key ways of taking care of your brain. I have a colleague who describes it as basically giving your brain a shower, and I like that analogy. Set boundaries. You know, establish hard edges to your day when you're going to stop work. Don't take work home. Don't check emails after hours. Turn off notifications. Better yet, turn your phone off at certain times of the day, during meals, during meetings. You know, when we see those notifications, that actually takes brain capacity to resist checking them. So just, you know, free yourself of that temptation. Schedule these kinds of renewal activities into your calendar and set reminders. And be careful about managing your own mindset. Look for where you may be making assumptions about what is and isn't possible, and about expectations. So when your boss emails you at 11 o'clock at night, are you assuming that you need to be responding? Or have you asked them what their expectation is about that? Be specific. Pay attention to where you're thinking and talking about things as a need or a should or a must. Try substituting the word want or choose when you think about taking that action. It actually makes a difference in your brain, how your brain responds when you feel like something is a choice. And if it doesn't feel truthful, doesn't feel like it's something you want to do, then learn to say no. And I have a page of polite ways to say no, again, after the resources in this presentation. Pay attention to whether something really is a need or whether it's just your little inner voice making it a need. You know, the most successful people are selective about where they focus their time and energy. Just because you can handle everything and juggle a million things that come your way doesn't mean that you should. And learn to have a little bit of self-compassion. You know, that little voice in your head that's always driving you, for many of us, you know, have it start to talk to you the way you would talk to a friend or a child. You know, this isn't about having a pity party. It's about just being a little bit kinder and more realistic in the expectations you set for yourself. Most of us expect so much more from ourselves than we would ever expect from others. And we talk to ourselves in ways we would never talk to other people. Ask for help. You know, be specific about the opportunities and resources that you need to be a successful leader and to take your career to the next level, and ask for them. Delegate. It gives other people a chance to grow. And, you know, asking for help lets other people feel good and activate those feel good chemicals. So just to recap, get a picture of really what you really want from your professional life and your leadership. Write it down. Let yourself feel what it would be like. Get clear on what's really important to you, what you want to do more of. Get your big rocks in the jar before others fill it up. Cultivate your emotional intelligence. Leaders don't have to have all the answers. They have to be able to inspire, motivate, and mobilize others to have the answers. Find a cadre of supporters and advisors who can give you feedback on your leadership, who can encourage you, and who can help you learn and grow. Maximize how you use your time and energy. Learn to say no. You know, this is all really important. That self-care is really important, because living that way not only gives you the opportunity to be your best self, but it also models for other people the kind of behavior that will allow them to be their best. And when they're being their best and they see you being your best, you're going to be a more inspiring, influential, and impactful leader. So I want to ask you, and here's an opportunity to use the chat again, which of these 5 steps will be the most impactful for you? Because a critical step coming out of this session today is to put what you've learned into action so that you can create a plan for your professional life and for your leadership that really fulfills you and allows you to be that kind of leader that others will follow. These steps are a little bit like the keys to the kingdom, you know, but you have to use them to open the door. And in fact, here comes that neuroscience again. If you don't take action from what you learned today, it's going to fade into a distant memory. And this time you spent won't make any real difference. Good intentions have a way of fading. The coaching is actually a great way of addressing that. And I am living proof that you can take good intentions about what you want from your leadership and your life and really turn that into a reality. So if you're really serious about that, about moving forward in your profession and truly, crushing it as a leader, I have an invitation for you. I'm inviting you to schedule a complimentary coaching session with me so that you can have a chance to put into action what you learned today. You'll have a chance to see what it's like to be coached and how coaching can help you to, up your leadership game, advance your goals, and really be fulfilled. And you'll have a chance to see if I'm the right coach for you and if coaching is right for you. I'm willing to talk to anyone who's really committed to looking at your leadership and serious about taking it to the next level. We'll do it over the phone. It's completely free, no obligation, and I promise that we'll have a great time and that you will walk away with something really valuable. So my contact information is right here. You can text me, email me, call me today with your name, your phone number, and I'll reach out to you by tomorrow to schedule a time for us to connect. And I'm emphasizing that today because if you don't do it today, the likelihood is going to drop that you'll follow through on this. If you found the session valuable and you'd like to receive my newsletter with tips about, upping your leadership game while still having a life outside of work, feel free to your contact information either by text or email or through my website, and I'll be happy to put you on my distribution list. I want to leave you with a final thought. So before I took these 5 steps, I mentioned I was working, at least 12-hour days. I was commuting 5 hours a day. And with all that hard work, I was still stuck in a leadership plateau. I wasn't in the driver's seat of my own career. I wasn't even in the passenger seat. I realized I was in the trunk. And it was in following these 5 steps where I defined and created my ideal professional and personal life of empowering and supporting other leaders and running my own company, which had been a dream since I was literally a teenager, in a way that with a lifestyle that lets me have the flexibility to be at my best. I mean, before I took those 5 steps, never in a million years did I think that any of this would have been possible for me. So it really is possible. So make sure you take action on those steps. So I'm going to stop now and open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Deb. And we have tons and tons of questions to cover. For anyone who joined late, this is Mauras Story from Alumni Career Development here at Holy Cross. And I'm really delighted to get to talk to you, Deb, and to share some of these questions. For those of you who might have to leave early, know that this has been recorded and the recording will be shared with everyone after this presentation. Deb has graciously agreed to stay on a little bit longer past the 2 o'clock hour. So if anyone's able to stick around for the Q&A, it will run a little bit long. So thank you very much for doing that, Deb.
Happy to.
But why don't we just get started and jump in? So the first question is, how do you bring out leadership skills when you don't have a formal leadership position?
So I mentioned this in the talk that you can lead from anywhere. Leadership is not about a title. It's about those skills. And when you bring that presence to bear, when you're focusing on other people and a joint goal and creating a common vision with others, you will show up as a leader, even if you're at the lowest rung on the ladder. And I didn't tell you details of my career, but I actually started out, my original job, my very first job was as an administrative assistant. And within 6 months, I was promoted to manage my entire department. And it really was from that way of showing up.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, I won't necessarily say that the rest of us will have as steep a career trajectory so quickly, but that is certainly a good testament to using those leadership skills. Another question for you is about leading change. So how do you get people excited about a new vision or direction of an organization?
I think that comes down to that safety we talked about, right? People want to feel heard, whether that's feeling like they need to have input, that their ideas are heard, or whether it's that their emotions and their nervousness and their concerns are heard. Make sure you make the space for that. Ask people, go back to that learning versus knowing. Ask them what gets them excited about it, what makes them nervous about it. What barriers do they see, and how can we plan to overcome those barriers? I think that's the biggest way. Even the biggest doubters will jump on board with a vision if they feel heard.
Yeah. And can you please provide some tips on making a leadership impact in a foreign country with cultural differences?
Yeah, so I think this relates not only to foreign country cultural differences, but you can have different cultures from organization to organization, or department to department within an organization, or from boss to boss.
Yeah.
And it really comes back to that learning. Ask questions. What is it you feel you don't know? Or ask people, what's really important about functioning in this culture that I need to know? What will make me successful?
And it sounds like asking questions seems to be a pretty critical piece of good leadership, just from some of the answers you've given so far.
Absolutely. And one of the first things I learned in my Doctor of Psychology and Leadership Psychology program, right, is that leaders who ask questions help raise people up. Because when somebody's your boss, there's a power differential, real or perceived,
Yeah.
and someone is sort of one down from the other. When you as a leader start asking somebody questions, it helps them gain face, to kind of gain power and to feel more important and respected and heard. So it really is a critical leadership competency, and I think it's one that too few of us focus on. We get so caught up in trying to make things happen and getting things done that we just don't pay attention to how important it is to cultivate and mobilize others in that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Well, and this we were talking about a little bit before the webinar too, but about how it seems to be a pretty big kind of cultural shift in organizations from the old way of top-down leadership to this new way of more matrixed, more team leadership, it seems.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
great.
Um,
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Another question for you. So this person would love to address how to transition effectively from peer to becoming a leader within that same group of people.
Yeah, that's one I hear a lot. I was just coaching somebody last night about that very issue, in fact. And I think it again starts with what's most important to you. How do you want to show up as a leader? Asking your team, getting feedback from them. What's their perspective about the fact that you're now a leader on this team? What's important for them? And that doesn't mean you have to do everything that everybody says, but again, that feeling heard, that getting it out in the open and getting really clear on the impact you want to make as a leader, I think is the first step towards, helping to start establishing yourself with a little bit of a different persona than what you were as a peer.
And I imagine that takes a certain amount of vulnerability too, which
Absolutely.
I could see probably a lot of people coming back to you and saying, oh, but then they won't take me seriously if I'm asking them what to do.
And in my experience, they actually take you more seriously
Wow.
because they respect you, they feel safe with you, they trust you, and
Yeah.
and you're showing respect of them. That's what
Yeah.
makes people feel confident in you.
That's a great tip, and probably something that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily jump to with our kind of old cultural norms. Here's
There's
a
a oh,
oh yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
there's a great resource in the resources page around that idea of vulnerability. It's a book called Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. I think it's one of the best leadership books I've ever encountered, and very practical in sort of some how-to tools.
Yeah. Oh, I've heard her name a lot, so that's a very good tip. That's great. Someone else had written about discussing mid-career growth. They said that so much career advice that they've seen is focused on those in their 20s instead of those in late 30s or 40s or approaching more of the traditional middle age. So for those people who might be middle managers or who might be, kind of mid-career, they might not be in a position where they're able to step back and feel like they can go to grad school and make big changes. What can they do to maybe make those incremental changes that can still make a really big impact?
Mm-hmm. So, get clear on what is the impact you want to have, and, ask for opportunities and assignments to get there, and think outside the box, volunteer for projects or, committees that will help you make a contribution in a different way. I mean, I would put myself in that mid-career category, and what I learned, the single most important thing that was kind of keeping me at that plateau was really not paying enough attention to how I was showing up.
Hmm.
So I was showing up as the person who can make things happen and get it done, and that's great. But I wanted to be the person who was helping craft the strategy, not just execute it.
Mm.
And that getting curious and being inquisitive and learning from outside the organization piece is what gives you those tools to kind of take it to the next level.
Mm. Well, and here's something that I think our current conversation sparked someone to ask. How do you set aside having answers if you feel like your expertise is needed in the room? And are there times when you need to adjust your leadership strategy for individuals who aren't performing well? And how can you do that effectively?
Absolutely. I'm not suggesting that you all of a sudden play Debbie the dunce, right? You still are an expert and you
Yeah.
bring a ton to the table. I think it's a balancing act between and a lot of it's in the delivery. So make
Mm.
sure you get voices heard, acknowledge good advice, be open to being swayed, but that doesn't mean you have to all of a sudden, change your course for everything everyone ever says. Just acknowledge great ideas, and ultimately, as a leader, especially, you are accountable. And
Mm.
so you have to be comfortable when you need to draw a line in the sand, drawing the line in the sand.
Mm. Well, that's helpful. Right, right. That it's not any one thing. It is a combination of many different skills. Right.
Yeah, and I think around the second part of that question, in terms of how you give others feedback, those inquiry questions can be helpful. I saw you do this. How did you think that went? And what did you think you could do better?
Mm.
Those are sort of the gentle versions. There are some more straightforward versions of what made you do what you did.
Right. Right.
What was the outcome, and what made you decide on that action?
Mm.
You may be uncovering some of those unwritten rules or expectations that you don't even know your team has
Hmm.
in that scenario.
Well, and that's helpful too, is just again using those questions to try and dig in as opposed to jumping to assumptions.
Hmm.
Well, so this is a question from someone who says they struggle as a leader because they want to listen to people, but they also don't want to feel like they feed into cycles of negativity or people constantly venting to them. So what
Mm.
suggestions do you have so they can seem empathetic and listening, but without constantly prompting that negative venting?
Yeah, so I used to call those the problem identifiers. And I would say, you're right, those are great problems. I think the way to turn it around is, what solutions do you think we should be thinking about? What are your ideas for solving them?
Mm.
And I think that's a way to get that energy moving from a negative direction to a positive one.
Yeah.
You know, Sometimes they just do need to vent, and you'll know your own people, whether it's their modus operandi of constantly venting, and you have to get them to see that that's not productive for them or the organization, and you may need to be direct at some point about that. But there are others who just, it's a way of their getting their emotion out.
Yeah.
And so, who are all-star players but are feeling a little, burnt out about something and need to vent, that might be a time to question yourself. Am I giving the team the opportunity to get their opinions heard and their frustrations heard, and to brainstorm together about how to solve them? Those ground rules again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and do you find, I know since your tip for leadership is about finding your tribe, I almost wonder if it could be good feedback to give to that person to say, hey, I think it would be valuable for you to try and develop some other relationships, maybe look for someone that you can pass them off to. So they're not necessarily venting to you, or kind of spreading it around. If as a leader you don't have, I'm just thinking of how busy people are, and if this person's constantly coming to you to vent, you might not have the time.
True. I'd be a little nervous about passing them off, because if they are truly a toxic venter, that
Oh,
can create
sure.
a toxic culture.
Yep. Yes.
And I
Yes.
think the reality is, if they are a toxic venter,
Sure.
it comes down to that tribe. Do they belong in your tribe? Are they the right person to have on the bus?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we have to make those hard decisions.
Right. That's a good point. Thank you. Here's a question about leadership within the job search process. So this person asks about thoughts of incorporating this leadership mindset while on a career search, and had some challenge with the delicate balance of give and take in the interview process. They feel like it can make or break an opportunity to want to show those leadership skills, but not come across too strongly.
Yeah, and it is a delicate balance. And I think, again, showing those leadership skills is getting really curious. I don't really like that word. It's the asking questions. So, tell me about your strategy. That's going to make you sound like a leader. And how do you see me contributing to that strategy? Or here's how I see myself contributing to that strategy. What more do you think would be important for me to bring to the table? Those will not make you seem weak. Those will make you seem strategic and thoughtful and forward thinking and on board with what the company's trying to make happen. And I alluded a couple times to the importance of knowing your purpose and your why. In a job interview, make sure you get across to them what your why is. That's what's going to make them connect with you. That's what's going to be your value proposition. It's not your what. There's tons of people who have the same skills you do, but it's your passion. It's what really blows your hair back that's going to be the differentiator for you. So make sure that's part of what comes across.
That's great. That is a great tip. And that takes a while to really figure out too. I mean, that's not necessarily an easy question to answer.
It may, and there's lots of ways you can do that, but it
Well,
may.
yeah. Well, so a follow-up question along those same lines is someone who asked about, steps for developing your vision and values. Kind of where do you even get started for some people who may not have really thought about that before?
So the values and strengths, those assessments will be really helpful. For your vision, that it comes to that dreaming again. Think about, there's a couple ways to do it. Think about the greatest experiences you've ever had in your life. And they don't have to be even professional experiences. They can simply be personal experiences. When you were totally in your zone, lost track of time, and just felt totally fulfilled and at peace, satisfied. What was going on? Who was there? What were you doing? What was the environment under which you were doing it? and what difference was it making? Look at a few examples of that and start to look for the themes. Another way to do this is think about what you wanted to be when you grew up as a kid, and, or what, if you could do anything, if you could quit your job today and resources were no obstacle, what would you do? And keep asking yourself, why would I want that? Why do I want that? What does that get me? Why? And eventually, when you stop asking the whys, or you come to your purpose, you'll know there's no other why.
Hmm.
And I just worked with a group of healthcare professionals on that very issue, and all of them said that process of keep saying, why do I want that? Why do I want that? Why do I want that? Was what really helped them get in touch with their mission and their purpose. So there's three tips on different ways to do that.
Mm. Well, and that's also a perfect segue for someone who talked about how they struggle with how to translate their skill set from their current position, which is in direct patient care. But I think that this could really relate to anyone who's in an independent contributor kind of a role. How do you transition from that kind of independent contributor, direct care, to outside and into more of a system-wide leadership, moving up into organizational leadership?
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. I would say start by trying to sit in the balcony and watch yourself as an actor on the stage. So if you're a nurse, for example, what are you doing every day? And not just, okay, I'm taking vitals and I'm managing this meds and whatnot, but really think about what skills you're using. I'm using empathy, I'm listening, I'm influencing other members of my team without any real authority, right? Those are all really important skills that many of us, those more intangible leadership skills, we take for granted. We don't really label them and recognize them. So I'd say that's one really important part. If you're trying to, and I work with tons of people who are trying to pivot from clinical roles into leadership roles. One of my major clients is the Boston College Master of Healthcare Administration program, my other alma mater. And so lots of those folks are in that situation. And that's where your why becomes really important, and doing a ton of informational interviewing with people, not just applying for jobs, because that system, that online system, is going to sort you out by keywords and rubric. You got to let people get to know you and get to see that leadership or administrative or side of you that's not just the caregiver or the clinician. And so informational interviewing, making contacts. I'm pretty confident that 85% or more of jobs are through making connections, not through what I call spray and pray, where you send out 100,000 resumes and then pray that you get an interview. And the other question that came up around that give and take in an interview,
right?
When you're in an interview, you don't have much of an opportunity to learn about the role and the organization. Find ways to get really clear before you put yourself in that interview situation of what's gonna, what the alignment is, what your value proposition is going to be in this situation.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, and here's kind of I guess, a case study for you of someone who writes that their position requires them to accomplish goals that are directly contradictory to what fulfills them. So they hate financials and they find them draining, but they're required to oversee this aspect of their professional life. And they're trying to figure out a way to deal with this.
So it's a little hard to tell without having specifics of the situation, but a couple things come to mind. How can you delegate it so that, kind of peel away the layers of the onion? What part of that do you hate?
Yep.
Is there a way to delegate the stuff that's less fulfilling and ultimately still be accountable?
Yep.
That might be one way. The other end of the spectrum is how much of this is your job. Are you in a financial role when you really want to be, directly working with people?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you may need to consider making a shift.
Yep.
Another kind of middle of the road idea is, if that is the case, but you don't feel like you can make a shift for whatever reason, how can you get more of what fulfills you to offset that stuff that you don't love?
Yeah.
Can you ask for different projects? Can you, do something outside of work,
Mm.
in a volunteer capacity, serving your community? Lots of people start, little side jobs. I actually listened to a leader in an organization who's she's an executive director, one of the executive directors at Mass General Hospital, who works part-time in a flower shop.
Hmm.
And she said, I actually pay my babysitter more to take care of my children than I do
Oh.
being in this job, but it's what fulfills me. It allows me to use skills that, and be in a different kind of environment. And
Mm.
I learn and grow in a different way. So there's sort of three pieces on the continuum of things that you might find helpful around that.
Well, and I appreciate that you brought up something outside of the workplace, because I think a lot of the time people don't realize that I mean, both kind of get a little bit of a mental break and outside of the workplace, but you also, those experiences develop professional skills, and they do develop good tools and resources that you can then come back and apply to your work in the workplace.
Yes, absolutely. And for the person who asked about kind of the mid-career, there's
Yeah.
actually a very well-known phenomenon called the mid-career slump.
Hmm.
And what is known is that after you hit that slump, people generally find greater satisfaction in the second part of their career.
Oh,
That
good.
their satisfaction is sort of like a U. Well, you can make that into more of a check mark
Oh.
by doing things like, finding other ways to stretch your skills, finding ways to delegate the stuff that isn't as exciting, finding
Mm.
ways outside of work that fill you up. You can really, make that plateau turn into an upward swing in your satisfaction a lot more quickly.
That's really encouraging and good to know. Yeah. Here's a question from a woman who writes that, do you have any recommendations for women who want to expand their leadership capacity in their career while balancing a personal and family life?
Yeah, so that's a tough one, and it's one I get all the time, right?
Mm.
And I think it comes down to a few things. Be really clear on what you're expecting of yourself, and how realistic those expectations are for yourself. Look around your organization. What kind of culture is it? How is it going to support you? How can it support you? Get clear on what you need in order to have the kind of dynamic that you want, both, at work and at home. What's it going to take for you to be successful? I think, again, that strategy and knowing what's right for you, what you're really going to need and want, and letting yourself accept it too. So some of us feel, we make assumptions. Well, if I cut, I'm making this up, if I cut back to part-time or I ask for a flexible schedule, I'm going to get sidelined.
Sure.
And that really is an assumption. Try to test that. How can you explore that before you immediately decide that's not an option for you?
Mm. Right. I mean, again goes to kind of asking questions, and that really only being a question, not any formal decision or anything more than that.
Yeah, and it goes to that reflection.
Mm.
Really get clear on what you want and why you want it, and then from there start to try to map out your tactics. If we jump too quickly into action, that's where we tend to make those assumptions and potentially create obstacles for ourselves that aren't really there.
Well, and since I am a mother of two young children, and I find in my work these questions come up a lot. And just as a follow-up, I find that what what each family needs is so different from the next that it's really kind of impossible to say if you're going to want to work full time, if you're going to want to not work, if you're going to want to work part time, if you can do any of those things. I've met so many people who thought that they'd continue working, who decided to step out of the workforce, people who thought, sure, I'm definitely going to step out. And then they had children and said, actually, I want to keep going. So it also seems like that personal reflection and being true to yourself and not really listening to anyone else is pretty critical.
And all of these great questions are the kinds of questions you also want to ask your advisory board, because I'm one person with one set of experiences, which, by the way, doesn't include being a mom and working. And so, ask some folks who do have that experience, who can give you that perspective.
Right. Because it's also going to help you just make decisions, any sort of big life decisions, whether to move across the country, whether to take an international assignment, whether to change jobs. They're all that same kind of personal reflection of what's right for you and not anyone else. So that's helpful.
And that asking yourself, where am I making an assumption? And what would happen if I relaxed that assumption? That's where you start to see windows and ideas that you might not have thought were possible.
What how do you find that your experience at Holy Cross has impacted your approach to leadership?
I alluded to this a little bit. I think for me, it's that servant leader mentality, really wanting to be someone who makes a difference in the world, not just somebody who has a job. That connecting with people, really being of service in the world is I think the biggest piece for me.
That's great. And what would you say is your favorite piece of wisdom that you've learned from your years of leadership coaching?
My greatest piece of wisdom. Boy, that's a tough one. I think it is about that expert persona. And part of what goes with that, I think a little bit, is our ego. And when you can shed that need to feel like an expert, you just open up so many doors for yourself and for others. And it's hard. It takes a lot of work, because, as I said, when we know stuff, it makes us feel good. It activates chemicals in our brain that make us feel good. But when we learn stuff, that also makes us feel good. So
yeah, that's great. Well, and the questions have slowed down, so I'll use that as a really great time to wrap up and really just say, I'll clap for everyone in the audience. Say thank you so much for really taking the time to share your knowledge and your skill and your wisdom and your experience with us today. I've had an absolute joy just getting to know you and working with you throughout this process. And I've learned a lot just about how critical self-care and this self-reflection is to good leadership, and that it's one of the quickest things that we set aside, saying, oh, we can focus on ourselves later, and yet it seems like focusing on yourself is the best thing you can do for your team. So thank you.
And it's the thing that's going to keep us from getting burnt out, which so many people are these days.
Yes. So thank you for that insight. I know I'll definitely be taking that away. And as Deb has said to all of you, if you're interested in a complimentary coaching session, it's an incredible gift that you're willing to offer. All of Deb's information is on the screen. If you miss it or have a question, please just email me in the alumni office. You can reach me at alumnicareers@holycross.edu or directly just msweeney@holycross. Thank you all very much for joining us today. A recording of this presentation will be available on the Holy Cross website within the next week or two. With this vacation schedule, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but you'll get an email from me when it's posted. You'll also receive a short email survey after the webinar, and I encourage you to please share feedback with us. That's how we get these great topics and we get good information about how to make these sessions worthwhile to you. Please join us next month. We're going to hear from a Dallas-based career coach named Tracy Tim, who's going to talk to us about how to get your career from stuck to unstoppable. So that'll be another great session. And again, I just really want to thank Deb for taking so much time to share this great information with us. And thank you all, and hope that you enjoy this beautiful summer afternoon.
Thank you, Maura, and thank you everyone for attending.
Bye-bye.
Bye.